Hello. Well, Happy New Year again, and to greet everybody in the new year, we have extra holidays. That is, there are 5 rail strikes going on this week alone. And with the exception of spokesman from the Labour Party, yes, I did say the word spokesman, since the word man actually means human being. Perhaps someday I might devote a video to the sexism inherent in the English language, but not now. Let's get back to the spokesman for the Labour Party, who are most decidedly not spoking at this particular time, seeing as they find themselves in a bit of a quandary, whether or not to support the strikes, which is supposed to be their natural position, and antagonise the remaining Labour voters who are just trying to get to work, or the ones who run cafes and things like that and people aren't actually coming in because they can't get on any public transport, or whether they should support the voters who are trying to get to work and antagonise the unions who are supposed to be their power base. It's a bit difficult. Anyway, the point is that trains are still in Britain a way of getting around, but somewhat less so. They are not economic in themselves because the idea is that you've got to get the workforce moving around. So it doesn't matter if the government keeps bailing out the failing companies. But the problem with that, of course, is why improve your work practices or invest in automated improvements if you're not going to go belly up whatever you do? And the unions, of course, have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. The median wage for a railway worker is £43,000 a year. Now, obviously, there are some who are going to be earning a lot more than that and some a lot less. But it's around £10,000 a year more than the average for the general workforce. So it may not be exactly princely, but it's not bad either. And this is an industry that's petering out. Lockdowns have showed how people can work without subjecting themselves to the crush and capricious reliability of public transport. At present, the unions are talking about pay, but they're not making a very strong argument for it. What they are doing is concentrating on the safety aspect. And, you know, that sounds quite reasonable on the surface. There are people walking the lines, for instance, with hammers to check for cracked rails and watching out for overgrowing tree branches, which could cause a lot of trouble, and falling rocks off embankments and all that sort of thing. And they're saying that there aren't enough people being given these jobs and being paid for them and being given the job security they need to consider keeping those jobs instead of going somewhere else. And they say that the electronic sensors which are being put into rails now to check for anomalies, that these systems can fail and not report cracks, which of course can cause a lot of trouble. Now that's true, if that were the only thing. So I think what we have to be concentrating on is not whether we should put the electronic sensors in, but what backup systems we can use to make sure that if the first system fails, the second system doesn't. You've got to remember, when people walk the rails to check them, they don't do it every day. They do it, I don't know what, once a week. I mean, there's only so much walking you can do, unless you had everybody in the country out there walking the rails. Well, you know what I mean. So there have to be backup systems anyway, even if we're just relying on human beings. But no sensible system would rely on just one warning apparatus for dangerous situations. The big difference now is that we have drones. And the union, of course, is trying to ignore that. Drones can check for all sorts of things, even things human beings don't see, because they can be equipped with infrared and ultraviolet and all sorts of odds and ends. And in any case, they're in the air and they can get a much better view in general. And AI can do a lot of pattern recognition that human beings, some can, some very talented at that, and some, well, they're not so talented. So the big problem would be if the companies relied only on drones and AI, obviously. But equally obviously, they will need far fewer men marching the rails, tapping the rails with hammers periodically to listen for telltale changes in the resonance. There is so much we can do with automation now. Of course, that's the reason the railway unions are trying to ignore this avenue. It's quite obvious. It means there are going to be fewer railway workers and therefore fewer people in their unions. So just as a reminder of what can actually happen, I am going to tell you the story of William Lee. And this is Granniopteryx interrupting herself again to remind you I am on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Please like this video. Please share it. Please subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, remember sometimes subscriptions get dropped and notifications don't turn up. So it's worthwhile subscribing to me on Twitter, Gab and Parler, where I am at Granniopteryx, and I always notify you on those platforms when I've uploaded a new video. Okay, you can also help me financially, buy me a coffee, or Subscribestar and PayPal. All the links are in the description. Back to the show. William Lee was an English clergyman and inventor who devised the first stocking frame knitting machine in 1589. The only one in use for centuries, its principle of operation remains in use today. Okay, sorry about the cut there. I called up the page for Calverton, where William Lee came from. All right. Okay, he developed... There are various possible reasons for why he developed the stocking frame. Some that his wife was a very slow knitter, or others that his wife was more interested in knitting than in other things in the evenings. But what happened was he was refused a patent by Queen Elizabeth I. And that was the first version of it. And then he improved the version and produced silk stockings rather than wool. And the Queen again denied him a patent. And this is the reason for it. Her concern for the employment security of the kingdom's many hand knitters, whose livelihood might be threatened by such mechanisation. So what happened to Master Lee? Oh, here, this is what the Queen said to William Lee. Master Lee, consider thou what the invention could do to my poor subjects. It would assuredly bring them ruin by depriving them of employment, thus making them beggars. Most likely, the Queen's concern was a manifestation of the Hosiers Guild's fear that the invention would make the skills of its artisan members obsolete, which is exactly what's going on here with the rail unions. And what happened was that William Lee then took off to France, where the Huguenots there took up his invention and ran with it. Now, the fact is that, like many inventors, William Lee was very unfortunate in his business acumen, and he died a pauper. And his brother, who had been involved in the venture with him, took the invention to, Nottingham, I think. Yeah. And finally, after about 100, and his apprentice, and they got started on a small scale operation. And in the end, Nottingham became a centre for that sort of weaving. But meanwhile, the Huguenots in France had got the invention going, and there was a flowering of French fine weaving of stockings from then on. Now, if the Queen had taken William Lee's invention up at the time, and they'd kept the secret of stocking knitting, it would have started there, and they would have been exporting stockings to everywhere. Instead, the Huguenots were doing that. New technology always puts some people out of a job. And it always creates new industries as well. Of course, those with interests in keeping their power base over the old industries are always going to make a fuss about that. Maybe, perhaps, Mr. Lynch should just give up on this. Allow the technology to take over. Yeah, you've reached the end of your kingdom, Mr. Lynch. Perhaps you should just learn to code. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.